Alright guys, so we're just going to do a quick set of notes on child labor and the work of Louis Hine. Alright, so the fight against child labor. At the turn of the 20th century, so we're talking early 1900s, there were no federal laws actually preventing child labor like we have today here in the U.S. Some states had laws regulating the work of children, but they were often very weak and poorly enforced. Children were employed in a wide range of industries at the time, so for example, textile industry, mining, manufacturing, agriculture, and they often faced very dangerous working conditions and long hours. Some factories, such as mine and mill, the owners within these, they preferred to hire children because they could pay them less than adult workers. And many poor families allowed their children to work because they desperately needed the money for food and shelter. They desperately needed that money to make ends meet. At the turn of the 20th century, progressive reformers organized to challenge the use of child labor. And many of them argued that the conditions were inhumane and that children should have opportunities to attend school instead of working these long hours in the factories. And we'll talk a lot more about progressive reformers a little later on. All right, so National Child Labor Committee, the NCLC, and Louis Hine. This picture here is of Louis Hine. The NCLC was founded in 1904 to fight child labor. It included influential figures from the progressive reform movement like Jane Addams and Florence Kelley, and received support from a wide range of progressive reformers. Jane Addams and Florence Kelley we'll talk a lot more about during the progressive era, but just know that they were key social workers. In 1908, the NCLC hired Louis Hine to take photographs of children, workers, in the hopes that images of the working conditions would convince the public to support their cause. Hine was a school teacher in New York who had become an expert photographer. Over the next 10 years, Hine would travel tens of thousands of miles across the country taking photographs of children working in a wide variety of jobs. So these next few slides provide examples of some of the photographs that Louis Hine took for the NCLC. These slides include information about the circumstances under which Hine took his photos for the NCLC and the technology that he used. This information is extremely important for you to consider when thinking about strengths and limitations of his photos as evidence in the next section of the lesson that we're going to do following this notes video. Alright, so this particular photograph that you're seeing here shows small children maintaining a loom in a textile mill in Georgia in 1909, and serious injuries were common for children who tended these powerful machines. By some estimates, up to 25% of workers in textile mills in the South were under the age of 16 at the turn of the century. The owners and operators of these facilities typically opposed the NCLC's crusade against child labor, and they would not have agreed to let a photographer document the working conditions of children in their factories and mills. Hine would often lie to gain access, telling people that he was an inspector or that he was only interested in taking photographs of the machinery. He was sometimes forcibly removed when management learned his real intentions. This picture here shows boys working for a glass manufacturer in Indiana in 1908. Typically, boys in glass factories would often work dangerously close to hot furnaces, molten glass, and Hine reported that this photo was actually taken at midnight, so they were working late into the night. Hine used a basic box camera to take his photographs, typically, The box camera, invented by Kodak in 1888, was light enough to be carried easily and allowed photographers to capture images by simply opening and closing a shutter. Although the box camera was portable and relatively easy to operate, it was not an effective tool for capturing action shots. Rapid movement by subjects would often cause them to appear blurry in the photograph, so Hine would often need his subjects to remain still when being photographed. Hine would also use a magnesium flash to capture images in dark conditions like those pictures that we have looked at. The flash technology was tricky to operate and would send a large amount of fire and sparks into the air, so these candid photographs were difficult to capture in in dark conditions. Subjects were usually aware that they were being photographed. This photograph here shows a 5-year-old boy. He's working in a seafood processing facility in Mississippi. He worked as a shrimp picker, a job that involved breaking the shells of shrimp and separating the meat with his fingers. Behind him is a pile of oyster shells. Hine reported that the managers of the facility had refused to allow him to take photographs at the plant, so he returned at 5 o'clock in the morning the next day to photograph workers before any managers actually had arrived. Child labor laws. So the efforts of organizations like the NCLC were very effective in mobilizing the public to act. And some states passed significant laws to regulate the age at which children could work and under what conditions they could work. The federal government also passed laws to limit child labor in 1916 and 1918. However, the Supreme Court struck down both laws. These laws were known as the Keating-Owen Act and the Child Labor Tax Law of 1919. They struck them both down as unconstitutional. It wasn't until the Great Depression that a federal law regulating child labor would stand. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 set 14 as the minimum age for all non-farm work. It also prevented children aged 14 to 15 from working during school hours and from taking jobs in manufacturing or mining. The law did not apply to agriculture work. Legal distinctions between industry and agriculture persist today, with industrial work being regulated more than child labor in agriculture work. Alright, so today we are going to analyze 4 photographs by Lewis Hine that portray young workers in the coal mines of Pennsylvania from 1910 to 1911, and answer this very important question. What were the working conditions like for children in coal mines in the early 20th century?